I used to believe my life would end like anyone else's. Quietly, someday, in the same obscurity I had lived it. But the night I opened my mouth and mocked what should never have been mocked, everything changed. I didn't realize it immediately. No bolt of lightning struck me down. No voice from the heavens silenced me. The punishment revealed itself slowly, cruelly, over time. It began long before this world resembled the one you know now. Long before cars, skyscrapers, and electric lights. My village was nothing more than a scattering of cottages, smoke curling from thatched roofs, the air thick with the smell of livestock and damp earth. Life was hard, short, and ruled by the church. Every Sunday, we gathered in the small stone chapel at the edge of town, where Father Anselm thundered about sin, salvation, and eternal punishment. I was young, restless, and arrogant, tired of being told to kneel, to obey, to fear what I could not see. That night, after too much ale, I stood with a few friends outside the chapel doors. The sky was moonless, the stars hidden by thick clouds. I spat on the wooden cross nailed above the entrance and laughed. "If he's so mighty, let him strike me now," I slurred. "Let the devil himself drag me down. If they're real, let them prove it." The others laughed nervously, some making the sign of the cross, others begging me to stop. But nothing happened. The chapel was silent, the night still. I raised my arms wide and shouted into the dark, "See, nothing. Empty threats from empty skies." When no lightning split the heavens, when no demon clawed its way from the dirt, I felt untouchable. I went home that night grinning, drunk on arrogance and cheap ale. The first sign came days later. I was sent to help harvest wood in the forest. As we felled a tree, the trunk cracked and came down faster than expected. I remember the sound of thunderous snap, the scream of men scattering. The world went black as the weight of it crushed me. When I opened my eyes, I was lying beneath the trunk, staring at branches swaying against the sky. The men around me were pale, certain they'd watched me die. But I felt nothing. No broken bones, no blood. I stood brushing dirt from my clothes, as though nothing had happened. "God preserved you," someone whispered. But the way they looked at me was not with reverence. It was fear. Not long after, sickness swept through the village. Fever, coughing, black boils. Entire families wasted away in days. I nursed my mother, my father, my younger sister. I caught the sickness myself, or I thought I had. The fever burned me alive from within. My skin broke into sores. My breath rattled in my chest. I prayed for death when the pain became unbearable. But death never came. Days later, I opened my eyes to find the house silent. My mother lay cold beside me, my father stiff in his bed, my sister's small body curled on the floor. Everyone gone, everyone but me. That was the moment I began to understand. I did not die when I should have. Years passed, and the pattern repeated. I was stabbed in a tavern brawl, the blade slid between my ribs. But by morning, the wound was gone. I drowned when a ferry capsized, only to awaken on the riverbank with water still in my lungs. I fell from a horse, broke my skull on stone, and awoke with no scar. Time after time, fate found ways to remind me that it could not claim me. At first, I thought it a gift, a blessing. I traveled, fought in wars, took risks no sane man would dare. I survived wounds that killed others 10 times over. But the years taught me what it truly was. A sentence. Everyone around me aged. Friends, lovers, children I tried to raise, all of them grew old, grew frail, and left me behind. I remained unchanged, their faces blurred together in my memory. Endless variations of the same tragedy. I could never hold on to anyone, never keep what I loved. Whispers followed me wherever I went, that I was favored by God, that I was cursed by the devil, that I was not a man at all. I saw fear in their eyes, suspicion, even hatred. I moved from place to place, century to century, trying to escape the weight of what I had become. And always, I felt something watching. A presence at the edge of my vision, patient, silent, waiting. I mocked powers I didn't understand. I spat at the sky and laughed at the silence. And they answered not with thunder, not with fire, but with eternity. That was centuries ago. I haven't aged a day since. And I know now, this is no gift. This is punishment. The first weeks after I realized I could not die were filled with confusion and disbelief. I had tested myself repeatedly. Heights, fire, rivers, sharp objects. But nothing could harm me. It was as though the universe itself had decided to reject my death, pressing a cruel and unyielding pause button on my life. At first, I embraced it with a reckless exhilaration. I walked across rooftops, dived into rivers swollen with rain, leaped from cliffs, and survived every time. I laughed at fate, mocking the rules that bound others to mortality. But that laughter faded quickly, replaced by a creeping, gnawing terror. I was alone, not just physically. There were other people, cities teeming with life. But in a way that no one could understand, I was utterly alone. Every accident that should have ended me left me untouched while my friends aged. My parents grew old, sick, and died. I stood beside their graves, silent, unable to weep for them properly, my heart too raw with the unfairness of my existence. Death visited everyone around me, but I remained. That first wave of grief was sharp and bitter, leaving a permanent ache I would carry into centuries I could not yet imagine. I attempted relationships, seeking solace in companionship. At first, it was easy to deceive those around me. Youth preserved, age unchanging, a face and body that promised vitality. But the illusion was fragile. Lovers aged while I did not. Children grew old in months or decades, while I remained unchanged. And when they died, I was left to endure the loss alone, over and over again. The pattern became unbearable. I began to withdraw, retreating from the intimacy that had once seemed so essential. I could not watch those I loved fade into dust. It was too much for a human mind to endure repeatedly. The presence, the unseen observer I had glimpsed in shadows and felt in the stillness, became increasingly tangible in those early years. I never saw it directly. It never spoke. But I felt it, like a cold wind brushing against my consciousness, like the shiver that ran down my spine when no one was near. It was patient, omnipresent, eternal. I realized, slowly and with growing dread, that it was aware of everything I did, every thought I had, every act of defiance or curiosity. It was waiting, silently, for reasons I could not know. I wandered cities, deserts, forests, and mountains, exploring the world with an unshakable awareness of my immortality. Europe in those early centuries was a patchwork of kingdoms and principalities, fragile and volatile. I walked through small towns untouched by time, and I also found the aftermath of war. Villages razed, bodies left in the streets, fields abandoned. In those moments, I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me. People came and went, empires rose and fell, and I remained, a constant in an ever-changing world. I witnessed plagues before they were even documented, long before cities understood the devastation they carried. I saw entire communities wiped out by diseases that humans could neither understand nor combat. It was unbearable to watch, to witness the suffering, the panic, the grief, knowing I would endure while everyone else perished. I moved through these crises like a ghost, invisible and untouchable, observing life and death in stark contrast. Each catastrophe left a mark on my mind, an indelible impression that shaped me as much as any physical wound might have shaped a mortal being. Over time, I became adept at blending in, adopting new identities as the world demanded. Names, faces, mannerisms, all disposable, tools to navigate the centuries. I lived among peasants, scholars, soldiers, and kings. I observed the feudal struggles of medieval Europe, the plague-ridden streets of London, the burning cities of the 100 Years' War. Each generation that I touched faded, leaving me alone once more. My memories grew heavier, a burden of endless knowledge and loss, and the presence never left. In my solitude, I began to test my limits further, not only physically but psychologically. I walked through fire intentionally, through collapsing buildings, through armies engaged in battle. Each time I survived. Each time, the universe seemed to recoil from me, as if the laws that bound others did not apply to my cursed existence. And with each near-death experience, the presence seemed to grow closer, its awareness more acute, its patience more deliberate. I felt it in the silence after a village was burned, in the cold of a winter night when no living soul was near. It was there, always watching, always present, but never revealing its intent. I attempted human connections, fleeting as they were, in an effort to anchor myself to the world. Children I raised grew into adults, then died. Lovers I held close withered and passed, leaving me with the unbearable weight of memory. Entire cities would disappear under war, famine, or fire, leaving ruins and ashes in my wake. And I would walk through it all, untouched and unbroken, a silent observer to the cruelty of time and chance. By the 3rd century of my life, the world had changed, but I had not. Empires rose and fell with staggering speed. The Mongols swept across Asia, leaving death in their wake. And I moved among survivors, silent, untouched. I witnessed the plagues of Europe, centuries apart, and each time I emerged unscathed. The world became a series of catastrophes I endured, while all around me succumbed. Cities crumbled, civilizations disappeared, and humanity rebuilt itself from the ashes, oblivious to the eternal witness walking silently among them. During this time, I developed a fascination and a terror for the patterns of human behavior. I observed greed, cruelty, love, kindness, and betrayal in endless cycles. Wars repeated themselves in different forms, yet humanity seemed blind to the lessons of the past. I saw kings slain by their own ambition, peasants crushed beneath armies' boots, and yet life continued. I endured. The presence endured. And I began to understand the true weight of immortality. Not the survival of my body, but the survival of consciousness while the world around me burned and rebuilt itself without pause. I wandered across continents, witnessing civilizations that no longer exist. I saw the rise and fall of dynasties in China, the conquests and collapses of African kingdoms, the spread of religion and philosophy across continents. Each event left me more isolated, more aware of my difference from those around me. I could never truly belong. I could never truly die. And the presence, patient and eternal, never left my awareness. It was a shadow at the edge of thought, a cold certainty that whatever I endured, whatever I survived, it was never forgotten. I grew skilled at navigating the chaos of human history. I learned languages, customs, and survival strategies across centuries. I became a phantom among the living, moving unseen, enduring beyond reason, beyond memory. I survived battles, plagues, fires, famines, and natural disasters that would have ended countless lives. And still, the weight of eternity pressed on me, heavier with each passing century. Even in solitude, even in isolation, I could not escape the constant reminder of my curse. Nights were long and unending. Dreams blended with memories of centuries past, visions of cities burning, oceans swallowing lands, plagues consuming millions. Faces of those I loved, lost, and could never reclaim haunted me endlessly. And through it all, the presence watched silently, patiently, without intervention, yet always aware. By the 5th century of my life, I began to lose track of time. Days, months, years, all meaningless against the backdrop of eternity. Humanity rebuilt, aged, and perished in cycles I could not alter. Empires rose and fell. Technological advancements replaced the old ways, and I remained. A witness to history, untouched by death, yet forever bound to the slow march of time. I sought solace in isolation, traveling to distant lands and desolate places. Deserts became my companions, mountains my refuge, and oceans my pathway. I wandered through the untouched wilderness, observing life in its rawest form. Yet even here I could feel the presence at the edges of perception. It was a constant reminder that my immortality was no escape, no reprieve, but a sentence to witness, endure, and survive beyond reason, beyond hope, beyond comprehension. I cannot count the generations I have seen rise and fall. I cannot enumerate the countless disasters I have walked through. I cannot name the friends, lovers, or children who have faded into dust around me. I am a constant in a universe of impermanence, an eternal witness to human triumphs and horrors. And still, the presence remains, unseen, patient, eternal, watching. Each day, each century is a reminder. Immortality is not a gift. It is a punishment for arrogance, for mocking what I did not understand, for daring to challenge powers beyond my comprehension. I endure, and I remember. I endure, and I watch. And I endure forever. By the 6th century of my existence, I had come to understand the full weight of my curse. Immortality was no longer a curiosity, no longer an object of morbid fascination. It was a relentless sentence, an inescapable chain binding me to a universe that would never rest. I had walked through centuries of human history, observing the ebb and flow of life, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the ceaseless cruelty that seemed intrinsic to existence. At first, the world had been full of small, tangible horrors. Plagues that swept through villages, fires that consumed towns, famines that left entire regions skeletal and desolate. Each of these events had shaped me, teaching me survival, but also teaching me despair. The absence of death's mercy in my own life meant that the suffering I witnessed left permanent scars on my mind. I could not close my eyes, could not flee, could not forget. I became a historian of agony, a cataloger of misfortune. The larger conflicts came later. I watched the Mongol hordes sweep across Asia, their conquests leaving cities in ashes, fields deserted, and rivers choked with the dead. I moved among survivors, silent, invisible, unaging, unmarked by time. I watched their horror as entire communities vanished in weeks. I could not intervene. To interfere would have been meaningless, and perhaps impossible. I endured while the world burned. Europe, too, became a theater of endless conflict. The 100 Years' War tore nations apart, leaving a tapestry of death and despair that stretched across generations. I walked through sieges, famine, and battlefields, untouched by sword or arrow, my presence unnoticed, unremembered. The people who once called me friend or lover were gone. Their blood had long seeped into the soil, and I remained, a ghost among the living. I began to perceive patterns in humanity's cruelty. Violence repeated itself endlessly, though the actors changed. Kings and emperors, generals and politicians, they all fell into the same traps of pride, ambition, and greed. Armies marched, cities burned, and I observed without the solace of death to ease my burden. Each catastrophe, each war, each betrayal added weight to my consciousness. My memories were a library of suffering, a record of pain that would never fade. The Black Death came next, and I walked through Europe witnessing the collapse of civilization as I'd never seen it before. Entire cities emptied, families decimated, the streets littered with corpses. I carried nothing with me, yet the horror filled every corner of my being. I watched people succumb to fever, desperation, and despair, their prayers unanswered. And I endured, untouched, the silent witness to the folly of mankind. Isolation deepened during these centuries. I had long since abandoned the attempt to form lasting relationships. Mortality claimed everyone I loved. And I learned that even fleeting companionship was a lesson in unbearable pain. I wandered, restless and lonely, through continents and empires, observing civilizations flourish and collapse. I saw the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of the Byzantine remnants, the reshaping of Europe and Asia by conquest and disease. I became a ghost of history, moving through time unseen, unchanging. Natural disasters compounded the horrors of human cruelty. Earthquakes swallowed cities whole, volcanoes erupted with catastrophic fury, and floods erased entire settlements. I survived them all, watching lives extinguished around me while I remained intact, untouched, and unaging. The psychological toll of enduring every horror was profound, as our dreams became fractured. The line between memory and nightmare blurred. I often woke in the ruins of places long gone, convinced I had entered a dream, only to discover the same devastation in reality. By the 9th century, I had begun to develop rituals of self-preservation and observation. I cataloged disasters, learned to anticipate their patterns, and honed my skills in blending with the living. I moved through societies as a shadow, a traveler, a teacher, or a laborer. My name changed, my identity altered, yet my awareness of eternity remained unbroken. I could feel the presence at the edge of perception more acutely now, like a cold awareness that never slept, never tired, never turned away. I was observed constantly, though I did not know why or for what purpose. I saw the world as a cycle of creation and destruction, the rise of towns, the birth of empires, the development of technology, and the collapse of societies became a constant rhythm. I endured every tragedy and bore witness to every injustice. People acted as if the lessons of history were infinite, never learning from the catastrophes of the past. And I remembered everything, every scream, every battle cry, every whisper of love and loss. I carried it with me, and it became as heavy as the centuries themselves. During these middle centuries, I became intimately familiar with the fragility of human life. I observed children born into war, families torn apart by famine, and communities wiped out by disease. I watched the cruelty of men inflicted upon each other in the name of religion, politics, and ambition. I moved among them, invisible and unaging, my presence unnoticed, but my consciousness fully aware of the tragedy around me. My immortality was a lens through which I saw the world without mercy, and I could never look away. I began to seek solace in the wilderness, traveling to deserts, mountains, and forests to escape the relentless tide of human suffering. Even there, however, the presence lingered at the edges of my perception. I could feel its awareness in the rustling of leaves, the chill of night air, the quiet before a storm. It was a reminder that I could not escape, not the world, and not the consequences of my arrogance. Through these centuries, I grew skilled at observation. I could predict the movements of armies, the outbreak of disease, the paths of natural disasters. Knowledge became my companion, my only tool against the unbearable monotony of eternal survival. I learned to find food and shelter in any environment, to move through societies undetected, to disappear into the background of history itself. And yet, with all these skills, I could not escape the existential weight pressing down upon me. The presence never left, never revealed itself, never intervened. Its silence was a form of torture, more profound than any disaster I endured. I felt it in empty streets, in abandoned homes, in the ruins of cities long forgotten. It watched me patiently, eternally, a reminder of the arrogance that had led me here. I had mocked what I could not see, and now I was bound to endure forever, a witness to the unending cycle of human suffering. By the 12th century, I had moved through continents so thoroughly that I began to see patterns in the rise and fall of civilizations. Wars repeated themselves with astonishing similarity. Cities burned, empires crumbled, and new powers rose to take their place. I was always there, unchanging, unaging, enduring every horror. My mind, once capable of laughter and defiance, now carried only the weight of observation, memory, and despair. Even in moments of solitude, I could not escape the presence. It existed at the edges of thought, in the quiet spaces between action and reaction. I never saw it, never heard it, yet I felt it acutely. It was a constant reminder that my immortality was not a gift, but a punishment. And as I walked through the ruins of human ambition, through the aftermath of countless catastrophes, I began to understand the full scope of what it meant to live forever. I endured and I remembered. I endured and I watched. I endured and I suffered in silence, unseen and unaging, the eternal witness to the relentless cruelty, beauty, and fragility of humanity. And the presence endured as well, patient, unseen, eternal, observing me as I moved through the endless centuries. By the 15th century, the world had begun to change in ways I could scarcely have imagined in the earlier centuries of my existence. Kingdoms and empires were no longer solely defined by brute force or conquest. There were ideas now, inventions, and discoveries that reshaped the way humans interacted with their environment. I moved among them, unseen, unchanging, a ghost observing a world reinventing itself while I remained constant, untouched by age or death. The Renaissance emerged as a glittering moment in human history. Art, science, and philosophy flourished. And yet beneath the veneer of enlightenment lay the same suffering I had witnessed for centuries. Cities were still devastated by plagues, people starved when crops failed, and wars, though more sophisticated, continued to claim countless lives. I walked through Florence and Venice, listening to scholars debate philosophy, watching painters capture the human form with breathtaking precision, all while knowing that each life around me was fleeting, doomed to be erased by the passage of time. I observed the voyages of discovery, the ships setting sail into unknown oceans, carrying men eager to conquer, trade, and map the world. I followed them silently, unseen, witnessing encounters with distant lands, often violent, often tragic. Entire populations were decimated, diseases introduced, cultures destroyed. Yet I endured, a constant observer of humanity's hubris and its consequences. In the bustling cities of Europe, I watched the rise of commerce and banking. I observed the power struggles between monarchs and emerging merchant classes, the exploitation of the poor, and the relentless pursuit of wealth and influence. My ability to remain unchanged allowed me to move through these societies without detection, to witness both the grandeur and the suffering, the beauty and the cruelty, in ways that no one else could comprehend. As centuries passed, the world changed even more rapidly. The Industrial Revolution arrived, bringing with it unimaginable technological progress, and with it, new forms of human suffering. Factories belched smoke into the sky, poisoning the air and water. Men, women, and children labored under brutal conditions, their bodies breaking under relentless work. Cities grew crowded, disease spread faster than ever. And yet I remained, untouched, observing the toll of progress with a mixture of fascination and horror. Through these centuries, I continue to seek connections, though each attempt ended in loss. Families I raised aged and died. Lovers I cherished withered into memory, and friends I held close were consumed by disease, war, or accident. The cycle of attachment and loss became unbearable, and I withdrew further, learning to endure solitude as a constant companion. Yet, even in isolation, the presence remained, a shadow at the edge of perception, patient, unseen, eternal. The expansion of empires, the colonization of distant lands, and the invention of machinery reshaped the world in ways both awe-inspiring and terrifying. I traveled with explorers across oceans, witnessing the rise of new nations and the fall of others. I walked through the streets of London as smoke and soot choked the air, through Paris as revolutions erupted, through New York as skyscrapers climbed toward the sky. Humanity's ingenuity was breathtaking, yet its cruelty and fragility persisted, unchanged across centuries. I began to understand patterns in human behavior, patterns that repeated endlessly regardless of culture or era. Greed, ambition, pride, and violence were constants, threading through every age I observed. Knowledge and innovation advanced, but the human heart remained as flawed as ever. I cataloged these patterns silently, a historian of suffering and triumph, a witness to the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. Even as progress accelerated, the unseen presence persisted. It never revealed itself, never spoke, but its awareness was palpable, a constant reminder of the arrogance that had led me here. I could feel it in quiet moments, in the hush of a library filled with scholars, in the silence of a factory floor at night, in the stillness of a deserted battlefield. It was always there, patient, observing, eternal. During this period, I also encountered early philosophical movements that questioned mortality, morality, and the nature of existence. I listened to scholars debate the meaning of life, the existence of God, and the nature of the soul. I could not participate, for my perspective was beyond comprehension. A being who had lived centuries and would live countless more untouched by death, haunted by the impermanence of everyone and everything around me. I carried knowledge and memory that no mortal could bear, and the weight of it pressed endlessly against my mind. Travel became both a necessity and a coping mechanism. I moved through continents with increasing speed, seeking new lands, new experiences, and perhaps the illusion of freedom from the relentless passage of time. I walked through the forests of North America before European settlement, witnessed the building of cities, the clash of indigenous cultures with colonizers, the relentless expansion of empires. I moved unseen, enduring the suffering, the displacement, the violence, and the loss that followed humanity wherever it spread. I observed revolutions that reshaped nations, the overthrow of monarchies, the rise of republics, the fight for liberty and equality. Yet each victory came at a staggering cost. Thousands, sometimes millions, of lives lost in pursuit of ideals. I moved through these events as I had through countless others, unaged, untouchable, a silent witness to the consequences of ambition and idealism. Natural disasters continued to test my endurance. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and storms reshaped the landscape, claiming countless lives. I learned to navigate these dangers instinctively, my immortality granting me insight into survival strategies that no mortal could master in time. I survived collapses of cities, fires that consumed entire districts, floods that swept away villages, and always I endured. By the 19th century, the world had transformed beyond recognition. Steam engines, factories, railways, and telegraphs connected continents and peoples in unprecedented ways. Humanity had harnessed energy, medicine, and knowledge to an astonishing degree, yet the flaws persisted. Exploitation, war, and injustice remained constants. I walked among them all, observing the birth of modern society while remaining untouched, unaging, and painfully aware of the impermanence of everyone I encountered. The weight of memory became more acute. I remembered the fall of empires, the collapse of civilizations, the countless lives extinguished across centuries. I remembered plagues, wars, fires, famines, and natural disasters. Every scream, every cry, every whisper of hope and despair was etched into my mind, forming a tapestry of suffering that only I could carry. The presence, silent and eternal, remained at the edges of perception, a constant reminder of the arrogance that had led me here. I became increasingly solitary. Human connections, fleeting and painful, were no longer a refuge. I withdrew further into observation and travel, wandering continents and oceans in search of a place untouched by the relentless passage of time. Deserts, mountains, forests, and remote islands became my sanctuaries. Yet even there, I felt the presence, patient and unyielding, watching silently. I could not escape. I could not die. I could not rest. By the 20th century, humanity had entered an age of unprecedented power. Machines roared, cities grew into sprawling metropolises, and nations wielded technology capable of reshaping the planet. I moved among them all, observing the horrors and triumphs alike. World wars, genocides, pandemics, technological marvels, and social revolutions. Each event left its mark on the world, yet I endured, unchanged and unaging, the silent witness to the unbroken cycle of human ambition, cruelty, and resilience. Through these centuries, I came to understand the futility of hope. Humans believed they could escape suffering, reshape the world, or transcend mortality through knowledge, art, or faith. Yet the cycles repeated endlessly. Kings fell, cities burned, civilizations collapsed, and the same flaws persisted. I endured it all, carrying the weight of centuries, the unending memory of loss, and the ever-present awareness of the unseen watcher, patient and eternal. By the end of the industrial age, I had walked through a millennium of human history, my mind sharpened by observation, my body unchanging, my soul burdened with the relentless weight of eternity. I had seen humanity rise, fall, and rise again, and I had endured everything they could throw at life. I was unaging, untouchable, and painfully aware of the cost of my arrogance. The presence remained, unseen and eternal, a reminder that my immortality was no gift, but a punishment, a sentence to witness, endure, and remember for all time. By the dawn of the 20th century, humanity had achieved a power over the world I could scarcely have imagined in the centuries before. Industrialization had transformed cities into vast machines of commerce and innovation. Trains and ships moved goods and people faster than ever before. Electricity lit the streets, and telegraphs and telephones allowed information to travel instantaneously. Humanity, it seemed, was beginning to control the forces of nature and bend them to its will. Yet, for all this progress, the horrors of the world remained unchanged. War, disease, and cruelty persisted with a relentless regularity, and I endured it all, as I always had. World War I arrived as a storm I could not escape. I moved through the trenches of France and Belgium, observing the slaughter of millions, the endless mud and blood, the cries of dying men. Bullets, shells, poison gas, they could not touch me. I survived the collapse of bunkers, the artillery barrages, the relentless advance and retreat of soldiers, all while humanity fell around me in unimaginable numbers. I walked among the wounded and the dead, untouched, and yet haunted by the enormity of the suffering. The presence, ever patient, lingered at the edge of my perception. I never saw it, never heard it, yet I felt it in the quiet moments before an assault, in the eerie stillness after a battle, in the desperation of men clinging to life. Its awareness was a constant reminder that my immortality was no gift. I had mocked powers beyond my comprehension, and I was condemned to endure, to witness, to survive, while the world burned and rebuilt itself around me. Between the wars, I moved through the world as an observer. Cities recovered, economies grew, and nations rebuilt. Yet the memory of mass slaughter never left me. I traveled to Europe, North America, Asia, and Africa, blending in among the living, unnoticed, and unchanging. I observed the rise of political extremism, the spread of ideologies that promised salvation but delivered only destruction. I watched families torn apart by poverty, violence, and political upheaval. And I endured untouched by the suffering that claimed them all. World War II followed, a global conflagration of unprecedented scale. I moved through cities under bombardment, through forests where battles raged, through concentration camps where humanity's darkest impulses were laid bare. Millions perished in flames, bullets, starvation, and disease. I remained, a silent witness, walking among ruins and corpses, unaged, untouchable, observing the extremes of human cruelty and despair. Each death etched itself into my mind, each act of horror a permanent mark on my consciousness. Even in moments of fleeting respite, the world offered no comfort. I watched the liberation of cities, the celebrations of the survivors, and the mourning of those who had lost everything. I attempted to form connections once more, seeking solace in friendship, companionship, or love. But mortality claimed all I held dear. Children I tried to raise aged rapidly before my eyes, Lovers succumbed to illness or accident, and friends vanished into history. The pattern was inescapable. I withdrew further, retreating into solitude, seeking any form of peace that the world would not grant me. The post-war era brought astonishing technological progress. Automobiles, airplanes, television, and eventually computers reshaped society. Cities expanded, economies flourished, and humanity reached heights I could never have imagined. Yet, the same flaws persisted. Conflicts, inequality, and suffering continued unabated. I moved through the modern world, observing it with the same unblinking awareness I had carried for centuries. Each innovation, each triumph, each disaster became another note in the endless symphony of human existence I was doomed to endure. I witnessed the horrors of the Cold War, proxy wars, nuclear threats, espionage, and political oppression. Humanity's ingenuity had grown, yet the capacity for destruction remained terrifyingly constant. Entire nations lived under the shadow of potential annihilation, and I walked among them, unaging, untouchable, aware of the fragile line between survival and catastrophe. The presence, ever patient, remained a constant at the edges of thought, reminding me that my immortality was punishment, not freedom. Natural disasters continued to claim lives on an unimaginable scale. Earthquakes leveled cities, hurricanes swallowed coastlines, floods swept through communities, and I survived them all. I moved through disaster zones as silently as a shadow, observing the desperation and grief of those who remained. Their suffering became a mirror of my own, a reflection of the eternal loneliness that immortality demanded. I endured while they perished, while the world pressed forward without pause. Humanity entered the space age, exploring beyond the bounds of Earth. Yet I remained tied to its history, to its suffering, to its endless cycle of triumph and despair. I witnessed technological marvels, yet I also observed the moral failures that persisted alongside them. Environmental destruction, inequality, violence, and oppression. I was a witness to everything, untouchable, unaging, yet haunted by the constancy of human folly. Relationships, fleeting and painful, became increasingly rare. Mortality ensured that no attachment could last, that no comfort could endure. I moved through the decades as a shadow, a traveler, observing lives rise and fall, enduring the endless solitude imposed upon me by my own arrogance. I learned to accept the weight of eternity, to navigate the world without hope for companionship, to carry memories of centuries of loss and suffering as both shield and burden. By the 21st century, humanity had reached an era of unprecedented connectivity and knowledge. Yet the same cycles persisted. Wars, disasters, societal upheavals, and human cruelty continued unabated. I walked through the modern world, observing it in the same unflinching way I had observed the world for centuries. Skyscrapers rose, technology advanced, but human suffering remained a constant. I endured, as I always had, and as I always would. The presence persisted, patient and eternal, at the edges of my perception. I never saw it, never heard it, yet I felt its awareness in every shadow, every silence, every moment of dread or uncertainty. It was a reminder that my immortality was not a gift, but a sentence to endure, to witness, and to remember forever. I walked through cities devastated by natural disasters, through regions ravaged by war and famine, through neighborhoods shattered by crime and human cruelty. I remained untouched, unaging, enduring the suffering that claimed everyone around me. I moved through the remnants of civilizations, silent and unseen, observing the endless cycles of creation and destruction that defined human existence. Even now, in the modern age, the weight of centuries presses upon me. Memories of wars, plagues, disasters, and personal losses are etched into my mind with relentless clarity. Faces of loved ones who have long since perished haunt me. Cities I once knew no longer exist. Empires and nations have risen and fallen, and I have endured them all. The presence, unseen and eternal, remains at the edges of perception, a reminder of the arrogance that led me here, the immortality I did not ask for, and the punishment that continues without end. The future stretches before me, unending and unknowable. Humanity continues to advance, yet its flaws persist. I will endure every triumph and every horror, every joy and every despair. I will survive when everyone I know has long since turned to dust. I will witness the world for centuries more, alone, unchanging, and forever under the gaze of the unseen presence that waits, patient and eternal, at the edges of my awareness. Immortality is not a gift. It is punishment. It is a sentence to endure, to watch, and to remember. And I endure, endlessly, eternally, forever. The world I'd walked through for centuries continued to evolve, but the patterns remained unchanged. Humanity advanced technologically, socially, and scientifically, yet the same flaws endured. Greed, ambition, pride, cruelty. They persisted in every age, every civilization, every era I observed. I, unaging and untouchable, moved through these epochs as a silent witness, carrying the accumulated weight of countless lives, tragedies, and histories. By the early 22nd century, human expansion had reached unprecedented levels. Cities stretched into the sky, colonies thrived on distant planets, and technologies once thought impossible were commonplace. Yet, the human heart remained unchanged, still capable of violence, neglect, and folly. I observed the same patterns I had seen since the beginning of my cursed existence. Civilizations building, flourishing, and collapsing under the weight of their own hubris. Natural and man-made disasters escalated with the progress of civilization. Climate shifts destabilized ecosystems, floods swallowed coastlines, and storms of unimaginable fury swept across continents. Wars, fueled by scarce resources and political ambition, left regions in ruins. Humanity had learned to wield weapons of unimaginable power, capable of annihilation on a scale previously unthinkable. And I endured, untouched, observing every act of creation and destruction with an unblinking awareness. Isolation had become my default state. Centuries of loss, of watching those I cherished age and die, had taught me that companionship was a luxury I could not sustain. Even when surrounded by millions, I felt utterly alone, untethered to the fleeting lives around me. The presence, ever patient, lingered at the edges of my perception. Its awareness was inescapable, a constant reminder that my immortality was not freedom but punishment, a sentence I could never escape. I had long abandoned attempts to form meaningful relationships. Every attachment ended in heartbreak, every bond in loss. Families I tried to nurture aged and passed within decades, leaving me with the hollow memory of love lost. Friends, mentors, lovers, gone. The centuries taught me that attachment was suffering, and suffering was unavoidable. To endure without the expectation of companionship became my only strategy for survival. The near-future world brought with it horrors I had never imagined. Advanced warfare, climate-engineered disasters, rogue artificial intelligence, and pandemics of engineered viruses reshaped the landscape of human civilization. Cities once vibrant were reduced to rubble in hours. Populations collapsed under the strain of new technologies, and entire regions became uninhabitable. I walked through these ruins as I had through every other catastrophe, unaging, untouchable, a silent observer to the relentless consequences of human folly. Despite the technological marvels of this era, humanity's capacity for self-destruction had only increased. Nuclear conflicts erupted in isolated regions, leaving scorched earth and silent cities. Autonomous weapons and artificial intelligence designed to enhance life sometimes accelerated death. Pandemics of engineered pathogens spread faster than containment measures could respond. And still, I endured, a constant amidst chaos, witnessing the triumphs and follies of millennia condensed into decades. I wandered through the remnants of civilizations, observing survivors adapting to a world increasingly hostile to human life. Societies became smaller, more fragmented, yet the same patterns of behavior persisted: greed, ambition, cruelty, and fleeting compassion. I watched these cycles repeat, a reminder that human nature remained unchanged even as the world evolved beyond recognition. And through it all, the presence remained. A silent, eternal observer, ever aware of me, ever patient. Psychologically, the weight of eternity pressed upon me more heavily than ever. Memories of centuries, millennia, clashed within my mind, a relentless torrent of history. I remembered plagues, wars, famines, and disasters. I remembered the faces of those I loved and lost. I remembered civilizations risen and fallen. The accumulation of endless memory became both a tool and a curse. It allowed me to navigate a changing world with unmatched skill, but it also ensured that no moment of peace or ignorance could ever exist. Every catastrophe, every injustice, every fleeting joy was permanently etched into my consciousness. I walked through deserted cities, climbing skyscrapers once teeming with life, now silent and empty. I explored abandoned laboratories filled with technologies capable of reshaping life itself, their creators long gone. I moved through forests reclaimed by nature, deserts scattered with the remnants of lost civilizations, oceans littered with the wreckage of human ambition. Everywhere I went, life persisted in some form, yet I remained detached, untouchable, immortal, cursed to endure while everything and everyone changed or perished. In rare moments of reflection, I considered the implications of my immortality. To live beyond death was to witness every failure, every tragedy, every fleeting happiness with perfect clarity. I could see the patterns of history as though they were threads in a tapestry, each event influencing countless others. I understood humanity better than anyone alive, yet I could not intervene, could not change the course of events, could only endure. The curse had made me omniscient in a sense, but utterly powerless to alter the fate of those around me. The presence, ever patient, became more palpable in these moments. I could feel its awareness in the stillness of abandoned cities, in the silent expanse of deserts, in the quiet void of oceans. It never spoke, never acted. Yet its gaze was inescapable, a reminder that my immortality was not freedom, but observation without end. I had mocked powers I could not see, and now I existed under their eternal scrutiny, my life extended into a sentence with no end. By the mid-22nd century, humanity had begun to confront its own mortality in new ways. Environmental collapse, scarcity, and technological hazards forced survivors to adapt or perish. Small enclaves of civilization persisted in isolated regions, clinging to life through ingenuity, determination, and sheer luck. I moved among them, sometimes noticed, mostly ignored, a specter of the past and the present combined. I observed their struggles, their triumphs, their failures, and I endured. Even as humanity approached the brink of what might be considered apocalypse, the presence remained. It was an unchanging constant, a reminder that whatever horrors or triumphs unfolded, I would witness them all. I could not die, I could not rest, I could not escape. Immortality was not a gift. It was punishment. A sentence to endure endlessly while the world reshaped itself around me, in cycles I could neither stop nor control. In these centuries, I became increasingly aware of the philosophical weight of my existence. I had mocked powers I could not comprehend, and, in doing so, condemned myself to a life without end. I had walked through the rise and fall of civilizations, through wars and plagues, through joy and despair, and always I had endured. Now, as humanity teetered on the edge of extinction and rebirth, I understood the full magnitude of my sentence. Endless witnessing, endless survival, endless memory. I wandered through ruins of cities, desolate landscapes, and silent laboratories, carrying with me the accumulated knowledge of millennia. I walked among the last remnants of human life, observing their struggles to endure, knowing that I would outlast them all. Time stretched before me infinitely, and I felt the unrelenting pressure of centuries pressing down on my consciousness. Each step, each observation, each memory added weight to an already unbearable burden. The apocalypse arrived not as a single event, but as a series of cascading catastrophes. Earthquakes, storms, floods, and fires claimed regions of the world. Societal collapse followed, with governments dissolving and resources vanishing. Pandemics of engineered diseases, wars over remaining supplies, and technological failures compounded the chaos. And I endured, a constant amidst the collapse, unaging, untouchable, a witness to humanity's final chapters and its tentative attempts at renewal. Even in moments of apparent hope, the curse reminded me of its permanence. Small pockets of survivors rebuilt cities, restored technology, and attempted to learn from history. Yet, the patterns repeated. Greed, ambition, cruelty, and neglect ensured that triumphs were fleeting, that disasters would return, that life would always carry both beauty and horror. And I endured, bearing witness to the eternal cycle of creation, destruction, and human folly. The presence, ever patient, lingered at the edges of perception, silent and eternal. I never saw it, never heard it, yet I felt its gaze in every shadow, every quiet moment, every decision I made. It was a reminder of the arrogance that had brought me here, of the immortality I had gained through defiance, and of the unending sentence that awaited me. I understood, with a clarity that only centuries of observation could provide, that immortality was never a gift. It was punishment. It was the burden of knowing too much, of witnessing too much, of enduring beyond reason, beyond hope, beyond comprehension. I would survive when everyone I loved had long since perished. I would witness civilizations rise and fall, technologies advance and collapse, life flourish and die. I would endure eternally as the presence observed, patient, unseen, and eternal. The world stretched before me, unending and unknowable, a tapestry of beauty, horror, triumph, and despair. I would walk through it forever, unaging, untouchable, a constant witness to the unbroken cycles of human existence. And in the silence of deserts, the ruins of cities, and the void of abandoned spaces, I would feel the presence, patient and eternal, watching me as I endured, as I survived, as I remembered every scream, every whisper, every fleeting moment of joy and terror for all time. Immortality is not freedom. It is punishment. It is the sentence of witnessing, enduring, and remembering endlessly. And I endure, eternally, endlessly, forever.